Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. Now, one of the network services that people usually need to have available is DHCP. It's how we get our dynamic IP addresses, of course. But sometimes managing it can be a little interesting. So today I'm just going to show you a couple of quick things that might help you in two scenarios. And we're going to talk about the first one in just a second. So if we open up your DHCP console in Windows, let's say that you need to expand the scope. You want to increase the subnet size from a /24 to something like a /23. Oh, but you can't actually change that once you've created your subnet. How do you change that? Well, the simple way of doing this is just to export your DHCP scope, delete it, and then put it back in again. But that's a whole thing, and it's not very simple to do. The other reason you might need to do this is if you are actually migrating from one server to another. And when you're doing that, there are newer like PowerShell commandlets that are designed to assist you with migrating DHCP from one place to another. But I find that the old way of doing it is really simple. And so I like to do that by preference where I can. And it always works. I'm not going to demonstrate this for you on a live system because it would involve some disruption, and I'll tell you a little bit about the disruptive properties. But essentially, when you have your command prompt, you can use netsh, and then it's just a matter of DHCP server. And there's a couple of ways that you can do this. When you're calling your DHCP server, by default, it will call the DHCP server that is local to that machine. It doesn't have to be the one that's local to that machine. It is entirely possible for you to give it, an IP address of the DHCP server that you want to act on, or a domain name. But typically, I'll run this on the DHCP server itself just because that makes it easy. Now, if you were to enter the export command, export actually shuts down the DHCP server while you're doing the export. And so if you're in a large network, that might be really disruptive, particularly if it's a complicated configuration and it's going to take a lot of time to export. But there is a way that you can do this without requiring that DHCP be shut down. And that is with the command dump. If you do netsh DHCP server dump, and then you output it to a text file, like so, using your output redirector, it will take your entire DHCP configuration and dump it out to a text file. And then you can just open your text file and edit it from there. I've got an example here that I exported from a live system. It doesn't have all the information and I have cleaned it up, but this shows you what you'll get. You'll get configure information for a server, fine. It's got classes, it's got a bunch of filters, which we really don't need. Most of this stuff I will end up deleting, quite honestly. But, then you've got a whole bunch of option definitions. I don't need any of that. What I will typically have is a set of options that take effect for the entire server. And then I'll have some options that are specific to individual scopes. In this case, which is pretty typical for how I set things up, the server as a whole has my local domain name set up, and it has default DNS servers set up, because I typically want those to be defaulted across multiple scopes. but for each subnet, I'll want a unique router address, and so that will be defined later on. I might also have different lease times set up per scope, so that's something that we'll look at as well. These settings are not something that you're generally speaking going to have to worry about, but they'll also be pretty specific to the source server. These things about interfaces and where they're bound, for that reason, I'll generally get rid of that as well. But then here we have add scope. And you can see that these are all the commands that you would need to use to restore DHCP either to another system or to this system. If I wanted to change the size of the subnet, here it is. This is already a /23. I could easily change it to a /22. Or I could, make it a /24. I can make the change here in my text file, finish modifying it, and then when I delete the scope, I can just re-import from this text file, and it'll bring everything over the way that I had it before. But it won't have any current leases in it. So doing this does mean you lose your current DHCP leases, but I mean, DHCP will come back up and start handing out leases again as leases expire. So this might be a slight interruption, but it's nowhere near as bad as if you were doing an export and having to shut it all down and then export all of that stuff, because I don't believe that brings leases over either. But in this scope, you can set a name, you can set a description, you can add the ranges if you have a range that you want to actually have handed out through DHCP, and you probably do. If you have exclude ranges, they'll be set there. Option values, here is a lease time that is specific to that subnet, and here is a router address specific to that subnet. Cool. Reserved IPs, these are the important things most of the time anyway, because these are the MAC addresses, name, description, and the IP addresses that are reserved for them. This is kept, and so that is really what you don't want to have to spend a lot of time redoing. And then there's additional scopes, super scopes. I'm not going to worry about that. M scope, not going to worry about that either. There's also a section for V6 configuration information. When you do a dump of DHCP, it handles both version 4 and version 6. But these are, again, just option definitions, and I don't really have DHCP version 6 in use anywhere because I use Slack anywhere that I'm using IPv6. So in order to clean this up, what I would usually do is I'm going to get rid of the classes, because I'm not worried about the classes. I'm really not worried about filters. I'm really not worried about these option definitions. What I want starts really with the option value. So I would just knock that out. Again, I'm really not going to be worried about any of that, because I don't want to bring those settings along to a new server. And if I am re-importing just a scope to the same server, I don't need to overwrite those settings. So in neither case for this is that useful to me. But I do want the scope, I want the IP ranges. I don't have any exclude ranges, but if I did, I would keep them, because that's important. Option values I'm going to keep. Reserved IPs I'm going to keep. And then I'm not going to worry about mscope or superscope. And I'm really not going to worry about any of the v6 stuff because I don't need it. And hey, presto, there you go. Once you've taken all of that stuff out, you've got configuration options, you've got your IP address. One other thing I forgot to mention, if you are intending to bring this over to a new server, make sure you change either the host name or the IP address that it has here, because it will have that, even if you just did the local server. it'll have the information of which server it's exporting from. So you'll change that by using like a find and replace. So once you've edited this however you need it to be, just the bits and pieces that you need to bring forward, then you can save this file just like so, and then bring your text file to your new server or keep it at the same server. And the command to re-import it would be netsh exec, and you're going to just tell it, hey, I want you to execute the commands that are in this text file. Make sure you give it the full path to wherever it's located, and then it will go through and it will run these commands one at a time in order to set the option values, add the scopes, and do everything else that is necessary. You'll get a whole bunch of lines that just say the command completed successfully. Ideally, if you get something that says something else, obviously something went wrong and you're going to have to figure that out. But for me, at least, when I'm doing this, what I get is a bunch of the command completed successfully. Then you can go back into DHCP, take a look at your scope, and you should be all good to go. But as a reminder, once you've dumped this, keep DHCP running while you're modifying your text file. Only when you're ready to bring it back, then you delete your old scope in order to minimize the service disruption. Because once you type this command in and hit go, the scope will be re-imported and it will take place very, very quickly. So just leave the scope in place while you're editing that text file, and then you're going to be ready to go. So that is basically it. Like I said, not a lot to it this week, but it's a skill that is kind of second nature to me at this point, and hopefully it's useful for everybody else as well. If you have thoughts on other things that you would like to see me demonstrate, or questions on how things are supposed to work that you'd like me to answer, feel free to let me know right down there in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door netadmin, and we will see you next time.